Well, good morning. I hope you were able to lean in a little bit to the idea of the heart of God as we listened to that song. I hope it certainly brought up some reflections of your relationship with our Heavenly Father and the sense of His heart and how it should motivate us to do things like we're going to talk about this morning. A gracious person will say with his life, I will consider you. I will consider you. A number of years ago, in fact, it was 1891 in Carnegie Hall when Paderewski showed up to do a piano concert. There was a young mother who took her little boy to the concert. He had been taking piano lessons, and it was her hope that if he saw this phenomenal pianist playing, he would enjoy the concert, but he would also be motivated to practice harder and maybe have as a goal to be kind of like Jan Paderewski. So the mother went to the concert with the little boy. She gets in her seat, and as she turns around, she sees the seat next to her is empty where her little boy should be. She didn't know where he went when all of a sudden she heard from the great Steinway piano on the concert hall stage the song of Chopsticks being played. She looks up and there's her little guy up there. Well, she's embarrassed to death. She doesn't know what to do. And all of a sudden, Paderewski enters the stage from stage left, walking very quietly towards the little boy and the piano. He stands behind the little boy, reaches his right arm around him and then the left arm around him to the keyboard and whispers in the little boy's ear, keep playing, keep playing. And so the little boy did. And as the little boy continued to play Chopsticks, Paderewski began to run his fingers up and down the keyboard in just a magical way, creating a whole new symphony of sounds. And when he was done, he had the little boy join him in standing up and taking a bow, and they got a standing ovation for the beautiful music that had just been played by the two of them. What Paderewski was saying by his actions to this little guy that could have been a very embarrassing situation was, I will consider you. I will consider you. There was a lot at stake there, the embarrassment of the boy, the embarrassment of the mother, maybe even the frustration of Paderewski. But yet he came around the boy. He said, I'll consider you and I will help you be respected, not just an embarrassment to your mother. I will consider you. This is just what Paul instructs us to do. It's what we have been talking about in 1 Corinthians chapter 12, verses 24 through 25, where it says God has put the body together, giving greater honor to those less honorable, so that there would be no division in the body, but that the members would have the same, or as we learned last week, and we'll continue to talk about again today, equal concern for each other. Equal concern means I will consider you. Again, in 1970, a professor of social psychology at the Princeton School of Theology taught a class on the life of Jesus. The focus of the class was on the idea that Jesus allowed his life to be interrupted on a daily basis. As Jesus navigated those last 3 years of his earthly ministry, he was constantly coming across people who wanted a piece of him. And every time Jesus would stop and engage with those people. We talked about Bartimaeus. Bartimaeus, the blind man on the road, cried out to Jesus. People tried to suppress his cries, but Jesus stopped and said, bring him to me. What can I do for you, Bartimaeus? And Jesus reached out and served him. Well, the whole idea behind this class was that concept that Jesus had allowed interruptions to his life so that he could consider other people. Well, the teacher arranged the final exam to be changed. It was to be taken in one location, and at the last minute, when the students showed up there to take the exam, they were told they needed to report to another location to take the final exam. And they only had 10 minutes to get from one location to the next, so they had to scurry off and head towards the other building, which is to the other side of the campus. Well, unbeknownst to the students, the professor had hired 3 different actors to place themselves in the direct pathway between the original exam location and the new one. One had tripped on a curb and hit his head and was bleeding. Another one had fallen off of his bicycle and had injured himself. And then a third actor was faking an asthma attack and was having trouble breathing. Well, all of the students rushed by these 3 people in need. These people who had demonstrated that they were in trouble. Only one of the 20 or more students in the class stopped to help one of the injured people. Only one. Well, regardless, only one student passed the exam. How about you? How would you have done in that test? How do you do when someone on the street looks like they're struggling? Someone on the side of the road with a broken down car or a flat tire? How do you do? Well, Jesus engages with a particular Pharisee and his disciples on this very topic in the book of Luke chapter 10. In verse 25, we read this: An expert in the law stood up to test him, saying, Teacher, what must I do to inherit eternal life? What is written in the law? Jesus asked him. How do you read it? And he answered, Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your strength, and with all your mind, and your neighbor as yourself. You've answered correctly, Jesus told him. Do this and you will live. But, wanting to justify himself, he asked Jesus, who is my neighbor? I think what he was really asking was, Jesus, who should I love like I love myself? Or maybe he was really asking, who should I consider? Who should I consider? Well, Jesus took up the question, verse 30, and a man was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho. It's about a 15-mile trek. And he fell into the hands of robbers. The robbers stripped him and beat him and fled, leaving him half dead. And a priest happened to be going down that road. Now, the priest was the supervisor of religious life, supervisor of the religious affairs of the people of that day. He was in charge of spiritual growth. When he saw him, he passed by the other side. In the same way, a Levite. Now, a Levite, he was the monitor of law living. He was the legalist, making sure that everyone would live according to the law. He arrived at the place and saw the man in distress. What did he do? He passed by the other side. And verse 33 says, but a Samaritan. And I want to recognize a couple of things here. It would be unusual, first of all, for a Samaritan to pass through Israel. Israelites treated Samaritans like dogs. They were less than human people. And Samaritans generally would not even pass through Israel. They would go miles around in order to avoid any type of interaction with Israelites because they were so despised. But Jesus inserts this Samaritan man into the story. It's likely that a Samaritan would be of a different color, a different class, certainly of a different culture. But this is who Jesus interjects into his story with this Pharisee. It goes on, it says, on his journey, the journey of the Samaritan, he came to him. And when he saw the man, he had compassion. And he went over to him and he bandaged his wounds and he poured olive oil and wine on them, and he took and put him on his own animal. And he brought him to an inn. He took care of him. And the next day he took out 2 denarii, gave them to the innkeeper. That's a good sum of money. And said, listen, take care of him. And when I come back, I'll reimburse you for whatever else you spend. Then Jesus asked the question, which of these 3 proved to be the neighbor of the man who fell into the hands of the robber? Which ones proved? And the Pharisee answers, the one who showed mercy, he said. I want you to notice something else. You notice he didn't say the Samaritan showed mercy. No, he said the one. This Pharisee couldn't even say the word Samaritan. He didn't want to identify anyone who would help someone else in a positive way as a Samaritan. How sad it is. He says the one, the one. Well, then Jesus says to him, go and do the same. What a slam in the face of this Pharisee. Jesus tells the Pharisee, go and act like this Samaritan. Go and consider those who come across the path of your life, regardless of their color, class, or culture, regardless of where they come from or what they may look like. They're all your neighbors. Consider them. You see, a person who wants to reflect the heart of God is one who will say to others, in distress or not, I will consider you. Well, I want to share 3 things that the Good Samaritan did this morning. And these 3 things reflect the heart of such a one who will say, I will consider you. So here they are. Here's the first thing that the Good Samaritan did. The Good Samaritan showed compassion on the man who was in trouble. Verse 33 tells us that when he, the Samaritan, saw the man in trouble, he had compassion on him. I think that Jesus uses this very emotional term, compassion, because the other men in the story were those who were religious leaders, and you would think of all people, they would be compassionate people. You would think of all people that they would have a heart of mercy. You would think of all people, these religious leaders would want to reach out and touch the lives of those who are in need, that they would have a heart of compassion. They would run and help. But instead, what did they do? They ran to the other side of the road. They crossed over to the other side, so they didn't even have to come near him. Some translations use the word pity, and that word is a good one. Pity is the feeling of sorrow caused by the suffering and misfortune of others. And that's pity, or it's compassion. The fact that this Samaritan would stop and take notice of the man is the first step of compassion. It's the first step of pity. And it led to his acts of mercy. And mercy is defined as a compassionate or kindly forbearance towards another, or showing benevolence. The Good Samaritan saw the man in trouble. He went to him with the goal of showing compassion. And what did he do? He demonstrated mercy. So here it is. The act of the Good Samaritan shows that he had a merciful heart. As I think of the heart of God that the music spoke of earlier, that was evidenced by the death, burial, and resurrection of Christ, by the mercy he had on sinful man, a willingness to engage, coming to earth, walking this dusty trails of Israel, going to the cross for you and for me. That certainly is mercy. And the Good Samaritan showed a merciful heart, reflecting the heart of God. Well, the second thing the Good Samaritan did was to take action. The Good Samaritan took the man that was in trouble and he acted. He did what was needed physically to engage in the healing process and the recovery of this man. In the least, he interacted with him with his time and with his energy, saying, I will consider you. The Good Samaritan invested himself in the person. The person was in need. He went out of his way to consider what the man needed. He went out of his way to invest in the process, expending energy to help this man to heal and recover. In the early hours of March 13th, 1964, some of you may remember the story. I mentioned it in a slightly different context a while back. But 28-year-old Catherine Genovese, Kitty, as she was known, was walking on her way home from the hospital where she worked the late shift in Queens, New York, and was attacked and killed right in front of her apartment building. 2 weeks later, after the murder, the New York Times published an article claiming that 38 witnesses saw or heard the attack. Not one of them called the police or came to her aid. How sad that is. No one considered Kitty that evening. Well, we say, well, that was a long time ago. Well, a little bit more recently, on October 24th, 2009, as many as 20 witnesses watched as a 15-year-old girl was brutally assaulted and raped outside a homecoming dance in Richmond, California. The viciousness of the attack was shocking, but what was even more shocking was the fact that so many people witnessed the attack and yet failed to intervene or even call the police. One of the police officers involved in the case said, what makes it even more disturbing is the presence of others. People came by, saw what was happening, and failed to report it. Some of the bystanders reportedly even laughed and took photos of the assault with their cell phones. This is called the bystander effect. There are a number of reasons, according to some psychologists, why this happens. Well, people don't want to get involved. People do not want to take time. People do not want to expend energy. People do not want to deal with any repercussions that might occur. People don't want to feel that they have to make a connection with someone that they really don't know, and some connection that would not be reciprocated. And the bottom line is people don't care. Well, this made me think of another parable that Jesus shared a few chapters later in Luke chapter 15. It's the story of a shepherd. The shepherd is out in the wilderness with his sheep, getting them fed and watered. In the evening, he returns to the fold. He tucks them all in, he counts them to make sure they're all there, and he finds out there is one sheep missing. Puts the gate on the pen, and what does he do? He goes out in the middle of the night, in the darkness, into the desert, risking his life with the wild animals, with the cliffs he could fall over, all the treacherous things that are out there. He risks his life to go out and get that one sheep. He finds them and brings them home. Why? Because he cared. He was concerned about the sheep. He considered the value of that sheep. He considered it. And so he went. We refer to that man as the Good Shepherd. And we read more about that in Psalm 23. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. Well, I think the Good Samaritan reflects the Good Shepherd because he cared about this man. He took a big risk in stopping along that path between Jericho and Jerusalem because he was not an Israelite. He was a Samaritan. Just stopping along that path was a risk. He was not welcome in that country. He was of a different color, different culture, a different class. but he took energy, his energy, and his time, and he expended it to do what needed to be done. He invested in this man. I think this act shows the Good Samaritan had a shepherding heart. He simply cared. That's what a good shepherd does. He cares. He has a shepherding heart. He has a merciful or compassionate heart, and he had a caring or a shepherding heart. Here's the third thing that the Good Samaritan did when he was on his way from Jericho to Jerusalem. He invested his personal resources. This is above the time and the energy that he invested. He invested personal resources in the life of this wounded man. In the book of Galatians, chapter 5, verse 22, we read about the fruits of the Spirit. Those things that all Christians should reflect in their lives. It says the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, fruitfulness, and so on. I'm stopping here because of goodness. The Greek word that's translated goodness in our English Bibles means generous or benevolent. The Good Samaritan was very generous. He was not only generous with his time and his attention to the needs of this man, but he was generous with his personal resources. In a day when having your own transportation was a real plus and a real big deal, not everyone had horses or mules or ox, but here's a man who had an animal, and he was probably riding it, and yet he put this man on his own animal to transport him to the hotel. Then he paid for the room, and he committed to paying for whatever else would be needed in the future going forward, whatever expenses would be incurred by this man over the next few days in his recovery process, however long it took. Did you get that? However long it took, he was going to reimburse the hotel management for their time and efforts. Well, I can't say for sure, but it seems to me like this man understood the New Testament principle of giving. That principle we read in 2 Corinthians chapter 9, where it says, whoever sows reapingly will also, or whoever sows sparingly will also reap sparingly, but whoever sows generously will reap generously, for God loves a cheerful giver. What this tells me about the Good Samaritan is that he had a generous heart. He had a generous heart. Well, how's your heart this morning? Do you have a merciful heart, a heart that shows compassion? Do you have a shepherding heart, a heart that cares about others? Do you have a generous heart, a heart that's giving, a heart that's willing to give when the needs arise, willing to invest your resources in the needs of others? Do you consider others? You see, a person who has a heart of compassion, a heart of a shepherd, and a heart of a generous person is a person who says to those around them, I will consider you. I believe you're my equal, and I see you have a need, and I will consider you. Well, this morning, as we wrestle with some of these things with the people around us, and sometimes there's a frustration and a tension on whether or not should we reach out to this person or not. I think from this passage and these passages we looked at this morning, we need to make sure we take the time to consider those around us. If we wrestle with that, maybe that needs to be our prayer, that God would change our heart. Give us the heart of the Good Samaritan, a compassionate heart, a shepherding heart, and a giving heart. That's my prayer for you this morning as we wrap up our time today. Lean in to our closing song this morning. Change my heart, oh God. And I pray that you will go forth considering those around you, whether they're like you or whether they're different than you. God bless and have a wonderful day.